Buckle up, everyone. We're diving deep into the ESTJ personality today. And let me tell you, these folks, they're known as the supervisors, the executives, or even the organizers.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't exactly scream, warm and fuzzy, now does it?
Right.
But I think there's more to them than meets the eye.
You're absolutely right. I mean, those nicknames, those can be a bit misleading.
Yeah.
While ESTJs are definitely known for their practicality and leadership, there's a surprising depth to them that often gets overlooked,
Okay, so give me the inside scoop.
Well, first, let's just break down what ESTJ even stands for in the Myers-Briggs world.
Right.
It's extroverted, sensing, thinking, judging. Each of those preferences play a crucial role in kind of shaping the ESTJ personality.
So walk me through it. What does it mean to be an extroverted sensor, a thinking judger? Like, paint the picture for me.
Okay, so an ESTJ's extroversion, that means they actually get energy from being around people. They love social interaction. They thrive in environments where they can, engage with others.
Yeah.
But it's not just about small talk for them,
Right.
They're sensing preference. This means they're grounded in the here and now.
Mm-hmm.
They're focused on concrete facts and the details.
Okay.
They're the ones who see what's right in front of them.
Yeah.
The practical, tangible aspects of life.
So not the dreamy head in the clouds type.
Not quite.
Okay.
And then when it comes to decision-making, their thinking preference takes the lead.
Okay.
ESTJs are all about logic and reason. They're going to analyze situations objectively.
Yeah.
They weigh, the pros and cons before making a choice.
Uh-huh.
And finally, their judging preference means they value structure.
Yeah.
Order.
Structure and order.
And planning. They like to have a plan and stick to it.
Okay, so we're talking organized, efficient, decisive.
Mm.
Sounds like the recipe for a natural-born leader.
You're catching on quickly. And it's no surprise that ESTJs often excel in leadership roles.
Yeah.
Their combination of, practicality, logic, and a love of order just makes them incredibly effective at managing people and getting things done.
But let's be honest, all that structure and efficiency can have its downsides too, right?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, nobody wants a boss who's a total robot.
That's a very valid point.
Yeah.
And it's kind of where those stereotypes about ESTJs can get a little unfair.
Okay.
While they do thrive on structure, they're not emotionless automatons.
Yeah.
They just express themselves differently.
Okay.
In fact, deep down, ESTJs have a strong sense of empathy.
Really?
And care for others.
That doesn't exactly fit the, tough-talking executive image.
I know, it's a bit of a paradox.
Yeah.
But it's true.
Yeah.
Their feeling function is there, but it's often expressed indirectly.
Yeah.
They might not be the best at verbalizing their emotions, but they show their love and loyalty through actions, through their dependability and commitment.
So they're the actions speak louder than words type.
Exactly. And that can sometimes lead to, misunderstandings, especially in personal relationships.
Yeah.
Their partners might crave more, outward expressions of affection.
Right.
While the ESTJ is busy showing their love by, taking care of practical matters, fixing things around the house, and providing a sense of security.
So it's less about, candlelit dinners and more about making sure the bills are paid and the house is in order.
You got it. And this is kind of where understanding the interplay of their cognitive functions becomes really insightful.
Okay.
Their dominant function, extroverted thinking, is all about logic, efficiency, and objective decision making. But their auxiliary function, introverted sensing, plays a crucial role in shaping how that logic is applied.
Okay, break that down for me. How does introverted sensing work with extroverted thinking? It sounds like a bit of an odd couple.
It might seem that way, but they actually complement each other beautifully.
Okay.
Introverted sensing is all about, drawing on past experiences, relying on what's tried and true.
Yeah.
So for an ESTJ, their logical decisions aren't just based on, abstract principles. They're grounded in what has worked before, what they've personally observed, what they've experienced.
So they're not just thinking in the abstract. They're drawing on concrete examples and real-world experience.
Exactly. And that's why ESTJs can be so good at troubleshooting and problem solving.
Right.
They have this wealth of practical knowledge to draw from, and they're not afraid to, roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty.
That makes a lot of sense. But I'm also curious about how they handle new ideas and unexpected situations.
Mm-hmm.
Are they completely averse to change, or is there some flexibility hidden in there somewhere?
That's a great question, and it leads us to their tertiary function,
Okay.
extroverted intuition.
Okay.
While not as prominent as their dominant and auxiliary functions,
Yeah.
extroverted intuition gives ESTJs this capacity to explore new possibilities and think outside the box.
They're not completely stuck in their ways.
Not at all.
Okay.
But they do need to be convinced of the practicality and usefulness of new ideas. They're not going to jump on a trend just because it's, shiny and new.
Right.
They need to see how it fits into their existing framework, how it aligns with their values and goals.
So it's not about resisting change. It's about making sure that change is actually an improvement.
You nailed it. And that brings us to one of the biggest challenges for ESTJs.
Okay.
Learning to balance their need for control and order with the unpredictable nature of life.
Oh, I can see how that could be a struggle. But we've covered a lot of ground already.
Yeah.
And I think it's time to take a closer look at these challenges. How do ESTJs deal with stress, conflict, and all those messy human emotions?
That's a perfect segue into our next discussion.
All right, then let's dive in.
So we've established that ESTJs, they're known for their love of structure, efficiency, and control.
Yeah.
But what happens when those things are threatened?
Right.
How do they handle stress, conflict, and the often messy world of emotions?
Yeah, those are the big questions because, let's be real, life throws curveballs at everyone, even the most organized and in control ESTJs.
Absolutely. And it's in those moments of challenge that we really get to see the complexity of the ESTJ personality.
Okay.
Their natural inclination when faced with stress is to take action, to problem solve, to regain a sense of control over the situation.
So no wallowing in self-pity for these folks.
Not their style. They're more likely to, roll up their sleeves, make a plan, and attack the problem head on.
Yeah.
And that can be incredibly effective, especially in practical matters.
Uh-huh.
But it's important for ESTJs to remember that not every problem can be solved with a to-do list or a spreadsheet.
So what happens when the problem is like more emotional or interpersonal?
That's when things can get a little tricky for ESTJs.
Yeah.
Their thinking preference, while a strength in many areas, can sometimes lead them to dismiss or downplay emotions,
Okay.
both their own and those of others.
So it's not that they don't have feelings, it's more that they're not always comfortable like expressing them or dealing with them head on.
Exactly. And this can create tension in their relationships,
Yeah.
especially with partners who are more feeling oriented.
So what's the solution? How can ESTJs bridge this gap and connect with others on an emotional level?
It starts with self-awareness, recognizing that emotions are a valid and important part of the human experience.
Yeah.
Even if they don't always fit, neatly into a logical framework.
Okay, but how do they actually do that?
Yeah.
It's easy to say, like, be more aware of your emotions, but it's a whole other thing to actually put it into practice.
You're right. It takes effort.
Yeah.
And practice.
Yeah.
One helpful tool is learning to identify and label their own emotions.
Oh.
So instead of just feeling stressed, can they pinpoint what's triggering that stress? Is it anxiety? Is it frustration? Is it anger? Or something else?
So it's like giving those emotions a name, a tangible form that they can grasp and understand.
Precisely. And once they've identified the emotion, they can start to explore what's causing it and how they can manage it in a healthy way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But what about understanding other people's emotions? How can ESTJs become more empathetic and tuned into the feelings of those around them?
Active listening is key.
Go on.
Really, really paying attention to what the other person is saying.
Yeah.
Both verbally and non-verbally.
Okay.
Putting aside their own, judgments and opinions and trying to see things from the other person's perspective.
So it's about stepping outside of their own kind of logical framework and tapping into that feeling function, even if it feels a bit, unfamiliar.
Exactly. And it's not about becoming someone they're not. It's about it's about expanding their emotional toolkit,
Yeah.
developing the capacity to understand and respond to emotions in a way that feels authentic to them.
That's a great point. It's not about denying their strengths. It's about adding new dimensions to their personality. And speaking of different dimensions, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, the subtypes of ESTJ. We talked about assertive ESTJs and turbulent ESTJs.
Yeah.
How do those subtypes influence their approach to stress, conflict, and emotions?
That's a great question, and it's where things get even more nuanced.
Okay.
Remember, both subtypes share the core ESTJ traits, but they experience those traits with varying levels of intensity.
Right. So it's like different shades of ESTJ.
Exactly.
Okay.
Assertive ESTJs tend to be more confident and resilient in the face of challenges.
Yeah.
They have a strong sense of self and are less likely to be rattled by, setbacks or criticism. Turbulent ESTJs, on the other hand, are more sensitive and prone to anxiety. They take things to heart more easily and might struggle with, self-doubt or perfectionism.
So it's like having the volume turned up or down on certain aspects of the ESTJ personality.
That's a great analogy.
Okay.
And it definitely affects how they approach stress and conflict.
Yeah.
Assertive ESTJs might be more direct and confrontational, while turbulent ESTJs might be more cautious and hesitant to rock the boat.
I can see how that could play out in different ways. So let's say an assertive ESTJ is dealing with like a conflict at work. They might be more inclined to like address the issue head on, to lay out their perspective and expectations clearly and assertively.
Exactly. They're not afraid to speak their minds and stand up for what they believe is right.
Yeah.
And that can be incredibly effective in setting boundaries and resolving conflict quickly.
But what about a turbulent ESTJ in that same situation?
They might be more likely to internalize the conflict,
Right.
to overthink and analyze the situation before taking action. They might worry about how their words or actions will be perceived.
Yeah.
And they might hesitate to speak up for fear of creating more tension.
So it's not that they're avoiding the conflict, it's more that they're processing it differently and trying to find like the most diplomatic approach.
Exactly. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Their thoughtfulness and sensitivity can be valuable assets in navigating complex, interpersonal situations.
So it's not about saying one subtype is better than the other. It's about understanding the strengths and challenges of each approach and learning to leverage them effectively.
Absolutely. And that's where self-awareness and personal growth come into play.
Yeah.
For assertive ESTJs, the challenge might be learning to temper their directness with empathy and understanding. For turbulent ESTJs, it might be about developing the confidence to speak up and assert their needs.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, that balance between their natural inclinations and the skills they need to develop in order to thrive in all areas of their lives.
Precisely, and that brings us to a fascinating aspect of personality that's often overlooked: the shadow functions.
Oh, shadow functions. Sounds a bit mysterious. What are we talking about here?
Think of it this way: we all have a set of cognitive functions that we use most naturally and comfortably.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that we've been focusing on so far.
Okay.
But there's another set of functions, the shadow functions that operate beneath the surface. Often unconsciously.
Yeah.
They represent aspects of ourselves that we might not fully acknowledge or express.
So it's like the hidden side of our personality, the part we keep in the shadows.
Exactly.
Okay.
And for ESTJs, these shadow functions can be particularly interesting.
Okay.
Because they represent a stark contrast to their usual practical, logical, and organized approach to life.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these shadow functions.
Okay.
What are they and how do they manifest in an ESTJ?
Well, the shadow functions for an ESTJ are introverted intuition, we call it NIA, extroverted feeling, FE, introverted thinking or T, and extroverted sensing, say.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
But how do these shadow functions actually show up in an ESTJ's behavior? What should we be looking for?
Well, let's start with introverted intuition. This function can manifest as flashes of insight or hunches that seem to come out of nowhere.
Okay.
An ESTJ might suddenly have a strong feeling about a decision or a person, even if they can't quite explain the logic behind it.
So it's like their intuition is trying to break through their usual like logical thought process.
Precisely.
Okay.
And this can be unsettling for ESTJs who prefer to have, a clear, rational explanation for everything.
Right.
They might dismiss these intuitions as irrational or illogical, but deep down they often hold a surprising amount of truth.
It's like their subconscious is trying to tell them something, but they're not always sure how to listen.
Exactly. And that's where learning to trust their intuition can be a powerful tool for personal growth.
Okay.
It's not about abandoning their logical thinking,
Right.
but about incorporating this new source of information into their decision-making process.
So it's about expanding their awareness and becoming more well-rounded in how they approach the world.
You got it.
Totally.
And that brings us to another shadow function that can be particularly challenging for ESTJs.
Yeah?
Extroverted feeling, or FE.
Okay, remind me what extroverted feeling is all about.
Extroverted feeling is focused on harmony, social connection, and the needs of others.
Mm-hmm.
It's about creating a sense of belonging and making sure everyone feels, comfortable and included.
So it's the opposite of the ESTJ's natural inclination to focus on logic, efficiency, and individual achievement.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
And that's why this shadow function can be so difficult for ESTJs to integrate.
Yeah.
They might feel uncomfortable expressing their emotions openly or making decisions based on feelings rather than logic.
So how does extroverted feeling actually show up in an ESTJ?
It might manifest in their desire to maintain order and harmony within their family, their workplace, or their social groups. Mm-hmm. They might take on the role of the peacemaker, trying to smooth over conflicts and make sure everyone gets along.
So it's like their inner diplomat is trying to emerge, even if it feels a bit awkward or unfamiliar.
Exactly. And
Right.
and it's important to remember that these shadow functions are part of who they are.
Yeah.
Even if they're not always expressed consciously,
Mm-hmm.
learning to recognize and understand these shadow functions can help ESTJs become more well-rounded individuals,
Right.
capable of connecting with others on a deeper emotional level.
This is all so insightful.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, I'm a little worried about our listeners.
Okay.
We've thrown a lot of information at them about ESTJs. It's a lot to process.
You're right. It can feel overwhelming. That's why I want to emphasize that this is just an introduction to the ESTJ personality type.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much more to explore and discover.
So where can our listeners go to continue their learning journey?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Personality NFT is an excellent resource for anyone interested in diving deeper into personality types.
Right.
They have, detailed profiles of each type, including information about subtypes, cognitive functions, and personal growth strategies.
Perfect. I'm sure our listeners will appreciate that.
I think so too. And I want to leave our listeners with this final thought.
Okay.
While understanding your personality type can be incredibly valuable, it's important to remember that it's just one lens through which to view yourself. You are a unique individual with your own strengths, weaknesses, and experiences.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
So embrace your individuality, continue to learn and grow, and never stop exploring the fascinating world of personality.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the ESTJ personality.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey.
It was a pleasure.
We'll see you next time for another fascinating deep dive into the world of personality.